Okay, everyone, good afternoon and welcome to our first virtual Holtzman Partners CPE event. Before we get started, I'd like to play a short welcome video from our managing partner, Chris Perkins.
Hello, I'm Chris Perkins with Holtzman. Thanks so much to each of you for joining us today. This is our 7th annual CPE event, though our first virtual series. I hope you get value from our presentations over the next week, delivered in hour-long segments for your convenience. Since 2004, Holtzman Partners has been serving clients across the country in audit, IT audit, tax, SOX compliance, and business advisory services. While this has been a challenging year, our firm is committed to our people and united in our desire to provide the best service to our clients. Today's session, Building a Culture of Inclusion and Diversity. Luke Childress and Mya Kelly are leading this discussion. Luke is our HR partner and has over 15 years of experience in public accounting. He really does it all for us, with experience in audit, EBP audit, and he's our SOX leader. A graduate of Texas A&M, Luke is also a board member for Zilker Theater Productions. Mya Kelly has over 15 years of HR management and recruiting experience across a wide range of industries. She specializes in talent acquisition, employee relations, training and counseling throughout all levels, and benefits and comp. Mya joined us back in 2018 and is a graduate of Texas Southern University. She holds her professional HR certification with SHRM and serves as co-vice president on the board of ARMA. I hope you guys enjoy the discussion. Thanks so much.
All right, thank you so much, Chris. And another first today, we will be presenting to you some non-technical topics. For those of you who have attended our CPE series in the past at the Alamo Draft House, you know that we historically have brought technical topics. And we felt like this year we would expand that content to provide 2 non-technical sessions. Myself and Mya will be delivering today's, as well as next Tuesday, another webinar series on managing the remote workforce. So we hope you'll join us for that as well. Today's topic of building a culture of inclusion and diversity is a topic that's very important to us at Holtzman. For those of you that know us, you know that our culture is strong, and we believe that in turn empowers our people to provide exceptional client service to you all. But part of that is creating an inclusive environment. We've studied, we've researched, and we've worked through the development of our own inclusion campaign. And while we know that we don't have all the answers and we've learned a lot through the process, we're still learning and we're constantly striving to improve ourselves. One thing that we know is that changes in an HR policy may reflect an organization's commitment to change and diversity, but it's not going to drive it. It takes leadership and team management, which is those of you in the room today, to execute and maintain a more inclusive environment at your organization. And that's why we felt like today's topic was a relevant topic and an important topic to bring to you, and we hope that you find it informative. Today, we're going to understand how diversity goes beyond race and gender and other observable differences that you might have historically associated with the term diversity. We're going to talk about why diversity and inclusion are important to your organization's success and longevity. And lastly, we're going to learn about the importance of tying SMART goals to your own diversity initiatives at your organization. Now, some housekeeping rules: you have all been muted and your videos turned off, but feel free to ask questions in the Q&A chat. And to the extent we have time at the end, we'll respond to those questions. Otherwise, we'll reach out to you after the session is over and hopefully be able to provide an answer. So with that, I'm going to invite Mya to join us as we launch our first polling question.
Thank you, Luke. So let's go ahead and launch a first polling question to get us started, just so we can kind of know where we're all at before we begin this webinar. So 1, we have not started, but we realize this is essential to our business. 2, initiatives are in place and we are working to achieve them. Or 3, we're still working on buy-in from leadership. So what stage are your inclusion and diversity initiatives in? Let's give this a couple of seconds, and then we are going to see what the results show.
We're currently at about 85%, so we'll give it just a little bit more.
Okay. Awesome.
Okay, with that, I'm going to go ahead and share the results here.
Well, this is actually great. So about 85% of us are in a place where we have initiatives and we're working to achieve them. 15% haven't started, but we know it's essential to the business and we're working to put those in place. I'm glad to see that we are not all, or no one's actually still looking for buy-in from their leadership team. So it sounds like we're in a good place. So this should be more informative, and we hope that you take something from this.
Okay.
All right. All right, so let's move on to the components of inclusion and diversity. There are 4 of them. So we have exclusion, the process of state of denying someone from a place, group, or a privilege. Inclusion, the action or state of including within a larger group or structure. Segregation, the action of setting someone or something apart from people or things. And then integration, the action or process of combining into an integral whole. So we're going to look at the parallels, how they compare, and then just kind of unpack this a little bit. So let's look at diversity without inclusion is exclusion. So how is that possible? Well, focusing solely on diversifying your workforce and failing to formalize your inclusion efforts will be a missed opportunity that impacts the success of your business. In turn, let's create an environment of exclusion if there's no forward thinking on how to leverage or integrate your diverse population. So that's definitely key. So what does that really mean, right? So without thought or deliberate discussion or action to cultivate an inclusion environment, all of the energy and resources that you would have spent on recruiting your diverse population or your workforce would be basically for nothing. So all of the painstaking tasks and efforts that you've spent on recruiting your diverse population, they're going to leave if they don't feel like there's an inclusive environment at your workplace. So as an organization, how do you benefit from inclusion? So leveraging your diverse talent pool for recruiting efforts, having various perspectives for client gains, involving different approaches to expand your reach, and really just using your diverse your workforce to maximize any benefit of the organization. So let's start with the basics and look at the basic 5 needs that affect feelings of inclusion. There are 5 of them. The first one is going to be belonging. So cultivating a sense of belonging. Employees want to feel like they not only contribute, but that they are wanted and that they belong. Having a voice. So employees need to feel like they have a say in the decisions that impact their work. So making sure that employees know that it's not a taboo topic and that your door is definitely always open. Feeling valued. So recognizing your employee base and making sure that they feel like an integral part of the business. So it's crucial that employees feel their organization values their unique perspectives and skills that they bring to the workplace. Sense of uniqueness. So encouraging your employees to show up and bringing their whole selves to work. So as an organization, are you doing that, or is it frowned upon? So understanding, what that looks like at your organization. And then last but not least, collaborative environment. So fostering a diverse thinking. When teams feel stronger, a sense of connection between each other, they're able to utilize the strengths and the skills of every individual in the team. So in talking about the 5 basic needs that affect feelings of inclusion, let's look at the main diversity categories. So there's gender, there's racial, ethnic, talent, background, also known as socioeconomic background, age, and global mindsets. These are the main diversity differentiators among many of your organizations. So let's continue to build off this. So we talked about the basic 5 needs of feelings of inclusion, and we talked about basically the gender differentiators in the workforce. Let's look at how inclusion looks in the workplace. So one is going to be empowering all team members to contribute to make decisions. So making sure those marginalized voices, that if we don't hear them, that we call on them, we encourage them to speak up, whether it's in meetings or just staff meetings. Sharing credit for team success and recognizing all those that contributed. So making sure you share in the recognition of your team success, acknowledging everyone on the team, regardless of how much or little they inputted, how much to input on whatever you're working on, right? So acknowledging the entire team. Encouraging team members to speak up and be heard. So in order to kind of get past this, sending out agendas, materials in advance, so everyone feels prepared enough to be able to provide input in the meeting. Maintaining authenticity while continue to be receptive to others. So under that, understand that each of your employees will bring a different set of experiences with them. So be mindful of dismissing opinions or ideas while they're all based on our own different working experiences. Practice inclusion leadership. This is going to be key. So ensure that decision-making table has representation from all of the demographics that you employ and serve. So that's going to be very crucial. And then inclusion, using inclusive terminology whenever possible. So like ally, equity, or equality, those are going to be definitely key. So building a more inclusive company ensures that your employees can come to work, feel comfortable and confident to be themselves in a way that not only suits them, but also delivers to your business needs. Now that we looked at inclusion, what inclusion looks like in the workplace, let's ensure that our inclusion efforts do not become exclusive. And they can be that, right? So looking at what that looks like. So one, conducting events across different employee groups and interests, right? Minimizing gatherings that are limited to certain groups of people, also known as social exclusion, right? So the objective of your inclusion efforts is to ensure that you include more people and not less. As we talk about being inclusive, let's look at our own biases and how we can create zones of inclusion within the workforce. So there are 4 zones of exclusion: neediness, victimhood, entitlement, and righteousness. Each zone stems from an unmet need of the feeling of I'm not good enough. The zones begin with neediness and victimhood. So neediness stems from the philosophy that it's someone else's job to meet your needs or they're not fulfilling your need. Victimhood is a sense of powerlessness and a longing for acknowledgement. Being in either of these zones can result in moving from one of the other zones of exclusion to entitlement or righteousness. Now, both entitlement and righteousness can be more difficult to understand because they are generally traits that associate with someone who is excluding others out of malicious intent or ignorance, when in actuality, these mindsets stem from self-preservation following feelings of exclusion. These zones of exclusion manifest when we've been in the previous zones, neediness or victimhood, for too long. So how do we break the mindset of exclusion? Okay, glad you asked. Well, one, we become aware of our zones of exclusion, as we all have them. 2, we seek to fully understand your zone of exclusion or our zones of exclusion and how people want their needs met. 3, we use our zones of exclusion to create inclusion, to help break those barriers of unconscious biases that we all bring to the workplace. So we've looked at inclusion, the benefits of inclusion in our organizations, talked about inclusion versus exclusion, how to make sure that our inclusion efforts are not exclusive. So let's look at how to make sure our inclusion efforts can be integrated into the workplace. So one, I put here, acknowledge and honor multiple religious and cultural practices. So maybe introducing a policy that honors a variety of cultural and religious practices, or even adding a floating holiday that gives employees the benefit to use a holiday, the floating holiday, at their discretion to observe whatever that holds true to them or something that they want to recognize. Eliminate bias in the evaluation process and promotion opportunities. This is so important. So making sure that you have promotion guidelines and evaluation process that is formalized. And once it's formalized, being sure that that's visible to your employee base. Welcome a multilingual workforce. So take into account language barriers and preferences and things that people may refer to as their native languages, right? Consider translation services, or even looking at your company documents and your policies and putting them in those languages that you feel like are going to be needed in your organization. Affinity groups or employee resource groups. So these are going to be largely based on employees' interests and really should be spearheaded by an employee. So those are going to be key. Use an inclusive workplace model, so gender-friendly restrooms, dedicated nursing rooms for mothers, creating a buddy system, and communicating safe ways employees can confidentially share their concerns. I would also say strengthen your anti-discriminatory policies. I know some organizations just don't have them, but it's key to put those in place. And I would say make sure that is a formalized policy that is in your employee handbook. And then last but not least, provide D&I training. This is going to be essential. It's something that should be done on an annual basis. It just kind of keeps those things front of mind. And so that is what I have for today in terms of looking at just inclusion and embedding inclusion in the workplace. want to go ahead and launch our second polling question, and that is, why are inclusion and diversity important to your business? And so that's going to be increased employee engagement, increased productivity, to increase longevity, or D, all of the above. Why is it important to your organization?
And we'll let these responses come through here. It looks like we have a clear winner in this poll.
Well, that's good. Yes.
So I'll go
increase
ahead and,
employee. Go ahead.
yeah, I'll go ahead and share the results here. The clear winner is all of the above.
Yeah, and that's great. I mean, I think all of these are key. They're all beneficial. We touched on most of them as we were kind of talking through the benefits of having inclusion efforts as a part of your organization. I'm going to pass things over to Luke to talk about the next piece of our webinar, and I will see you guys back soon.
Yeah, certainly. So as Mya mentioned, all of these things are important to our business, and inclusion and diversity impacts all three of these areas. So since most of the people in the room today are accountants or finance individuals, as you know, we like data. We like to analyze things, and we like a lot of numbers. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the impact on your business and how that translates from a number standpoint. So let's first talk about decision-making in general. Decision-making is the foundation of a company's success, as you know. And a 2017 study by People Management analyzed 600 business decisions across a range of companies. And what they found was there was a direct link between inclusive decision-making and better business performance. So the survey compared individual decision makers and added to that, with a single gender, they added multiple, 3 or more decision makers to see how that impacted the decision-making model. And what they determined was 58% improvement in business decisions as compared to the individual decision maker. Improvement means faster and better outcomes in the end. Now you take that single gender group and you add a gender diverse group, you improve your decision making by 73% as compared to the individual decision maker. And then lastly, add to it a diverse group according to origin, gender, and age, and you are at that point 87% more favorable when it comes to your decision-making skills as compared to a single decision maker. And so as Mya mentioned, as you work toward this inclusive concept, you're including more people at the table. The more decision makers you can add to the table, the better your outcome will be. So now let's translate this decision-making into a tangible number in terms of profitability or revenues, which is something we're all very concerned with, and it's near and dear to our heart. So 2018 Boston Consulting Group conducted a global study across 1,700 companies, and they looked particularly at what they deemed innovation revenues. Now these revenues are defined as revenues coming from products that were introduced in the last 3 years as a proxy for this term, innovation impact. What they discovered was companies with an above average total diversity had 19 percentage points higher innovation revenues than their less diverse peer group. Or to put another way, almost half of their revenues came from innovative revenues. Also important to note, these companies reported 9 percentage points higher in EBIT margins. Now, those are some tangible facts that I think are eye-opening in terms of we all want to be innovative, we all want to look at the next best thing, and having a mix, a diverse group of people and different ideas contributing to that is certainly the way to get there. Important to this survey to note also is that diversity is termed as a broad-based approach in terms of dimensions. So national origin, industry, career path, gender, education, and age, all of these factors were incorporated into the scale of a gender diverse score. And so what Boston Consulting Group did, which I found interesting, was they then wanted to take some hypotheticals and say, okay, what can our company do to improve upon their innovation revenue impact? How can we tweak that number by changing our diversity scale? And so what they did is they went back to the companies and they changed the mix in terms of management team as well as employee base. And what they discovered was it's only a relatively small change is necessary in order to have a significant impact on your revenue. So they looked at each different dimension and determined what would I need to improve my revenues by just 1%. So first they looked at hiring managers from different career paths than the industry norm. And what they discovered was just a 3% change in your current manager mix to incorporate some managers from different career paths contributed to that 1% increase in revenues. They then looked at gender, and they discovered that only a 2.5% change in your current diversity mix according to gender could drive the same 1% revenue increase. Next, they looked at industry origin and found only 2% change was necessary in order to achieve the same 1% of hiring individuals that didn't come from the same industry that you're currently in. And then lastly, national origin. Now, national origin can encompass not only different ethnicities, but also individuals from other countries outside of the existing management and team base. And what they discovered was only 1.5% was a necessary change in order to drive that 1% revenue increase. Now, it's also interesting to know that these are all taken in isolation. What Boston Consulting Group pointed out was these results can be additive across the dimensions. So the goal would be to create diversity in each of these sections in order to drive that revenue exponentially higher. Another interesting fact that I wanted to share with you today is for years we've seen leading research being conducted on businesses all noting linear impacts between diversity, inclusion, and better financial performance. Some of the leading research firms that we've reviewed research on, McKinsey, Deloitte, Catalyst, just to name a few. And so in 2019, Josh Bersin, who's from Deloitte, conducted a specific study of 450 companies. And what he wanted to discover was what impact does talent management have on better performance, and how is that linear relationship according to talent management? And he broke down talent management into 5 categories to determine of these 5 categories which had the most impact in terms of financial performance. And what he discovered from his analysis was the lowest impact to a company's performance in terms of talent management was its foundational structure. Now, foundational structure, think org chart, or if you have a formalized, distinctive organizational structure within your company. That was the least impactful in terms of your financial performance. Next up was your strategic talent plan. So this encompasses things like developing and maintaining an overall idea of how you want to hire, where you want to hire, and who you want to hire. That was the next impactful when it comes to performance. Next, we have learning. He noted that formalized learning tracks, development assignments, and training for onboarding all had an impact that was third in line when it comes to improving your financial performance. The fourth one was workforce planning. So this had the second highest impact. And what workforce planning here means is your total end-to-end sustainable work experience. This could include your onboarding, your systems that your employee base is working through, having open conversations about growth potential and mobility. That overall workforce planning was important. Second important to the top impact of performance, as you could have guessed based on today's topic, is inclusion and diversity. What he noted was across all of the 450 companies, the ones that had the most mature and robust inclusion and diversity programs were also the ones that had the highest performance rating amongst that peer group. What was also interesting to note is that those that had the mature and robust inclusion and diversity programs actually had things in each of the other 4 areas related to inclusion and diversity. So that concept spilled over into the other talent management categories. And so it points out that in today's business world, our ability to attract and engage people of all ages, cultures, backgrounds, and types is paramount to our business success. And as we know, employees make up our companies. Employees drive the success of our company, and the longevity of employment is important. So another study that I found interesting was the impact that inclusion efforts have on employee engagement. recent Glassdoor study showed that 67% of job seekers said that a diverse workforce is an important factor when they are evaluating companies and job offers. Also noted was 83% of early career workforce say that they are more engaged at work when they believe the organization fosters an inclusive culture. Interestingly enough, on this same survey, 60% said that they were engaged when they didn't feel that there was an inclusive environment. And so that shows you there's quite a disparity in employees feeling like they're engaged at work related to inclusive efforts. And lastly, after having shared this 83%, I found it interesting that on the flip side, of the people surveyed, 57% of people thought that their company should be doing more to increase diversity amongst its workforce. Now, that's clear that inclusion is important to our employee base and to our teams, and therefore important to the longevity of our company and its ability to continue into the future and continue to be competitive. So the question that we get asked often and that we see when we attend trainings and webinars, people always say, what can I do? What can I do to increase my inclusion and diversity? And I stop and think that's really not the question that you should be asking, what can I do? There's not really a step that one can prescribe to say, do X, Y, and Z, and you'll all of a sudden become an inclusive place. It's more so you have to stop and ask yourself, where would you like to be as an organization? Where do you see yourself in the future as an inclusive organization? And then back yourself into, how can I achieve that? How can I arrive at that goal? And so what I'd like to show you here are some things that we implemented at Holtzman as we were formulating our inclusion and diversity campaign that we felt were important to that process. And I think they're general such that they can be applied to any organization. And I think they're paramount in order to make that a successful campaign effort. First and foremost is leadership. Creating a top-level focus and strategy at the executive level is important and is crucial to have a successful campaign. And furthermore, along the lines of creating this top-level focus is also to include a champion. It's highly important that you have an executive-level champion who is monitoring the execution of your inclusion efforts and monitoring then the ability to maintain those efforts and ensure that you're carrying out the program as your vision intends. Next, it's important to create behavioral standards at your entity. As Mya mentioned in an earlier slide, having formalized anti-discrimination policies and defining for your employee base what's acceptable behavior and what's not acceptable behavior, and furthermore, setting an example as leadership to follow so that the employee base knows that you stand behind these efforts and support them. And we can't underestimate training. Training is important for so many topics in things that we don't even realize. Certainly training on things like unconscious bias, similarity bias, structural bias. Education is key when it comes to implementing inclusion and diversity into your organization. And it's important to note that it's not just education of the employee base, but equally as important is educating leadership and educating top-level executives as to what inclusion means and how you can be an inclusive environment at your organization. Next, how you integrate your diversity and inclusion strategies in your talent management is important. That's in terms of recruitment, performance management, leadership assessment, how you're taking all of the efforts that you have on paper and incorporating those into your day-to-day talent management strategy. And as I mentioned in the earlier slide, a robust program should spill over into all of the other categories of talent management such that you're actually successful in not only attracting, but engaging and maintaining your employee base in an inclusive environment. Next, we have creating employee networks. So as Mya mentioned, this would be things like diversity and inclusion champions or employee resource groups and communities of practice. What this intends to do is bring people together. As you saw in the earlier slide that I showed on employee engagement, this is something that is crucial to your longevity, and it's very important to your employee base. And so the more that you can involve your entire organization, the more successful you will be. Inclusion is not something that's an executive level action. Inclusion exists at all levels within an organization. And so creating these employee networks helps to create support systems as well as opportunities for education and the ability to have the right conversations, which takes me to my next point, which is being good at listening and communicating. We know that we are in an environment of transparency right now, and the more transparent an organization can be, the more engaged the workforce is, and the more successful that company can ultimately achieve. And this openness is what drives inclusion and diversity, having conversations, being willing to listen, and also being willing to fail. As I mentioned early on in the very first introductory slide, we are constantly striving to improve, and we don't get everything right. But the important thing here is that we're trying to make strides, and we're putting forth the effort and the work necessary in order to achieve a more inclusive environment. And that goes a long way, and it shows not only your internal employee base, but it shows externally what you as an organization are working towards. And lastly, I can't underemphasize enough the importance of this last point, and that is creating a visible scorecard. Oftentimes, we're very quick to put out a bunch of initiatives that we want to achieve, and then they fall by the wayside, and we don't actually go back and circle back to say, hey, are we actually executing these and achieving the goal that we wanted to achieve? And so creating a visible scorecard to measure your progress is very important. This scorecard could include metrics for recruiting, it can include metrics for mentoring programs, what your turnover looks like, what your employees' participation in employee resource groups look like, even diversity in your suppliers, and so much more. And so creating this visible scorecard will drive you to success. And so to give an example of that, Mya has just joined, so she can tell us how tying SMART goals to it is actually a way to achieve that scoring in the end to measure your success.
Thank you, Luke. So let's look at the acronym SMART. So the S is for specific, M is for measurable, A is for attainable, R is for relevant, and T is for time-based. So how do we make our SMART goals specific? Let's state exactly what you want to accomplish. You need to be clear and that your goal is easily understood. How do you measure your goal? Well, use smaller mini goals to measure the progress. Make sure your goal is trackable and quantifiable. Without the ability to measure your goal, you can easily lose focus of your goal just altogether. How do you attain this goal? Well, you work towards the goal and make sure that it's challenging, but that it's possible. So making sure that it's attainable doesn't make sense, right? And then relevancy. What makes your goal relevant? Why is the goal important? Does it align to the needs of your organization? Always tying goals to your business need is going to be key. And then T, time-based. Give yourself time, but set deadlines. Make sure you have several target dates to make sure that you're staying on track so you can meet that goal or that deadline date. So just kind of looking at the SMART acronym and why it's important, it really just kind of helps you put color around your initiatives, what they look like, and really the benefits of having the initiative in your organization. So for an example, modifying your recruiting strategy to diversify your talent pool. So maybe that's recruiting from HBCUs or working with diverse organizations. And setting the goal, maybe it's going to be, you want to set it for June of 2021 and give yourself some wiggle room. Maybe instead of saying June 2021, 6 to 12 months from now, whatever that looks like. SMART goals are meant to be very flexible. They're not, what you put in place can change over the weeks to come. The goal is that you have something in place and that it aligns with this SMART acronym. So what I want to go ahead and do is look at our last polling question. And before we kind of get to our last polling question, let's think about all the things that we've discussed and really where your needs are. And so in launching our last polling question, it's what is the biggest area of improvement in your organization? So whether it's formulating inclusion and diversity initiatives, whether it's integrating them, or even measuring them. So think about that SMART acronym that you talked about. I know most of you said that you were already putting things in place and you were looking to achieve them. Are they tied to a SMART acronym? Are there deadlines, or are we just kind of working to achieve them with really no goal date to implement them? So I'm going to give you guys a couple of seconds to think about that, and then we are going to take things from there.
We are about 75%.
Okay.
We'll give it a few minutes.
Okay.
Okay, I'll go ahead and launch those results.
Interesting. This is so key. So it looks like we're all in different stages. Some of us are formulating our diversity initiatives. Others, we're trying to integrate them. And it looks like the bulk of us are trying to measure them. So if we don't have those SMART goals in place, maybe going back to the goals that you've written down or that are in front of you and say, hey, let's tie these SMART acronyms to our initiatives. And so what I would say in terms of like my closing thoughts based on this is create a subcommittee if you don't have one already for your initiatives. And that could be basically leaders around the table that can enact change. I would also say pull from those that are a part of your employee base that are from underrepresented groups, making sure that you have all types of genders, and just kind of think about those diversity categories that I spoke about earlier. So making sure that there's just representation around the table. I would say that as you continue to create your subcommittee and put these people in place, continue to meet often. I think that diversity is extremely important in the workplace, and we're all here to support you in your efforts to get there. So thank you for your time today. I will turn it back over to Luke for finishing closing remarks.
Yeah, we wanted to allow a little bit of time at the end if there were questions, and we have a question that I think is an important one to bring up, and that question is, can we give some examples of creating employee networks that doesn't end up actually excluding some people by default? So certainly I'll share what my thoughts are, and then I'd be interested to hear what Mya's thoughts are too. I think a lot of times that's a common misconception when you have affinity groups or employee resource groups, is that it's an exclusive group. And as Mya mentioned, exclusion is when you're limiting. And so I think it's important to have a group that can educate, and a group that has some identification that you can be a part of, but really the impact of that is, what is that employee resource group doing? So are you sponsoring events that are then open to all employees? Are you bringing education and materials to your employee base such that you're able to involve people, but yet you're still able to have a focus and pay attention and really acknowledge the diversity in that case, acknowledge that particular employee resource group by offering these individual different training events or whatever it is you might host. Mya, what are your thoughts on that?
I would say poll your employee base. Instead of trying to figure out what are networks, associations, events, or the interests of your workforce, poll them, do a pulse survey, see where their interests lie. Remember, you want your employee resource groups or affinity groups to be employee-led. I think it's great to have leadership leading the group, but I think that they should be employees should be spearheading them, right? That's what brings the collaboration. That's what really fosters that diverse thinking and really kind of opens the platform for, we're all here, regardless of our title, we're all here to support this interest or this effort. So I would say if you don't have an idea, I would say launch a pulse survey and then see which employees want to take that on and spearhead that in your organization. So that would be my recommendation as you kind of start thinking about employee networks and resource groups that would be beneficial to your workplace.
All right. As Mya mentioned, in that involvement, I think is so important. And what we found successful at Holtzman, as she mentioned, when we laid out our campaign and shared it with our employee base, the interest was very high. And we developed first a subcommittee for just the diversity initiative campaign efforts. And then within that, we have further subcommittees that drive execution of individual goals. And one of those is in affinity groups. And we did that exact thing: survey, find out where people have interest. And let's say you have interest in a certain organization or a certain group, then your affinity groups can help drive the efforts there. They can call attention to that this resource group is out there. They can help facilitate involvement in that employee resource group. And really the idea is, again, including as many people as you can, not just being just an exclusive group, but instead educating and incorporating. So we did receive another question that was important to us, and part of the SMART goal aspect was how we measure the success of initiatives. And I think it's important, particularly as you talk about inclusion and diversity, to recognize that inclusion and diversity are really, one drives the other. And so you can recruit all you want to from a diversity standpoint, but without being an inclusive environment, you will fail in those efforts. And so you can measure success. I think in Mya's example was a good one when you talk about recruitment. For us at Holtzman, we historically we were more reactive in our recruiting process, to where we went to career fairs at the universities that are right around Austin and tended to just recruit from that pool because that was available. But if you really want to reach as far as diversity is concerned from different areas, then you've got to attend career fairs, get your name out there, and really you increase the talent pool, and that in turn will drive a diverse group of people that are applying for the job. So you'll get the people then to apply, but that's not the end of the work. The end of the work then is, okay, now what other efforts do we have that are inclusive efforts? So I think people tend to gravitate towards just recruiting, but you have to have an inclusive mindset within your organization. And so other inclusive mindsets that we have as part of our campaign are things like, if we're going to support other organizations, support nonprofits, support minority-owned businesses, how do we then measure that? And maybe it's in terms of, you put a budget with, we have this budget that we're going to spend towards supporting these efforts, or maybe it's in terms of service. You can provide service to nonprofits or to minority-owned businesses, and we'll know we've achieved that if by 2022 we've given this much or supported this much to an organization or been involved in some capacity. And so with each one, I think you have to be thoughtful about putting together where your timeline is and how would you be able to look back and say, we achieved what we want to achieve. And what's really interesting about it is it's ever evolving. It's not like your diversity and inclusion campaign is a static thing that you put in place. For us, we intend to, as we achieve certain goals, we'll let them fall off the list and then we'll replace them with other goals, because it's a constant evolution of becoming more inclusive. And so that's important when it in terms of measurement, is you achieve one only so that you can then create another. So I hope you were able to glean some information and some nuggets of wisdom out of this. If you have questions or think of things after the webinar that you would like to ask us, please don't hesitate to reach out. If you've not already registered for our remaining 3 webinars, there will be a link in the chat for you to do so. And from some housekeeping standards, we'll be sending out CPE certificates to attendees after the webinar series has concluded. So be on the lookout for an email from Prolera that will involve evaluation, and then you'll get your certificate after that. So we certainly thank you for your time today. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and we look forward to seeing you at our next 3 events. Thanks so much.
Thank you, guys.